How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Sunday? Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehudit in South Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, David in Indiana, Melissa in Great Neck, Lucy in Minnesota, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shauna in Canada, Shandor in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Frank in San Pedro. Hello, Ella, Marjorie in Georgia. Hello, Chaim in Florida. And Sharon is making a Mishloach Manos, right? So Purim is a week from today. You might want to be getting your gifts ready to exchange with friends and to give to the poor. So I think next Sunday So first of all, I think next Saturday night going to be impossible to do our class because Shabbos ends late. Then we have to go back to shul for a Megillah reading. So probably next Saturday night we won't do a class. We're going to a Purim Suda, Purim meal next Sunday that will interfere with our regular time. So we'll have a changed time, but we'll do our class a week from Sunday. Also, definitely just a heads up, we're getting into a very busy time of post-production on our movie. So this Wednesday, Thursday, and then 3 days the following week, as the director, I'm going to be all day in what's called color grading, right? Doing the final color, tweaking adjustments. It's quite an experience. You're just me and the cinematographer and the colorist, 10, 11, 12 hours a day staring at every shot and really finalizing the color of the movie and getting it to pop. Odds are we'll probably have to make class a little bit later on those days, and as we get closer to it, I'll tell you exactly when it's going to be, but my intention is, even if I have to make class a little later on those days, to not cancel class on any of those days, God willing. Okay. Our daf today. So anyway, until you hear different, everything is on schedule. Just be paying attention to the schedule. And whenever we make an announcement, that class is going to be postponed on a day, we'll put it on the Facebook page at Accidental Talmudist. Okay. Where are we holding? So today our daf is page Yud Chay, right? Page 18, Chai. And we're going to pick this up on 18a, just a few lines from the top. We've been talking about Maseh Beis Din, right? So court enactments, which have a kind of privileged position. First of all, somebody can collect, for example, right, the minimum ketubah amount that a husband must promise a man must promise to a woman at the time that he marries her, so that even if they don't agree to a higher ketubah payment, a higher marriage contract payment, when he dies or divorces her, the statutory minimum, so she can collect that even in the absence of a document. Generally, we're continuing our discussion of Mishna number 6 here in chapter 1, which is about one who finds a promissory note that is lost, and then related kinds of documents, and where we're concerned that if we give it back to the lender, this document that is evidence that somebody borrowed money, well, it might be that the borrower already paid it back. Or it might be that the borrower never borrowed the money, right? And so that's why the promissory note was never given. He never gave it to the lender when he took the loan. And all kinds of other conditions that we've talked about, where now that we find this lost object and we have an urge, and it's a mitzvah always to return lost objects, and who's the owner of a promissory note? Presumably the creditor, the lender. But because there's the possibility that this document could lead to a borrower having to pay twice, or property being seized that shouldn't have been seized, etc., under a whole bunch of different situations, the sages have ruled that you don't return such a note to the creditor. So yesterday we started talking about how the law of found promissory notes intersects with documents that have been ratified by a court, by a rabbinic court. And there's different levels of ratification, authorization, etc. And sometimes you will seek out the owner and return it to him. And other times, most of the times, whenever you're unsure, better to give it to a halakhic authority, to just give it to the rabbinic court and let them figure it out. Okay. So while we were talking about rabbinic enactments yesterday, so we were talking about various ketubah payments, right? So the marriage contract payment. And then the final question we were looking at is, what about a woman who is divorced or widowed from betrothal? Right? So the man and woman were betrothed but never actually became married. So if she had a ketubah, a written marriage contract, she maybe could collect from betrothal, especially if it said that she could collect even from betrothal, not only from marriage. But in the absence of such a document, she does not collect the mandatory minimum 100 dinars or 200 dinars because those mandatory minimums apply to marriage and not to that intermediate state of betrothal, even though to break off a betrothal requires a bill of divorce. Nevertheless, it is not full-fledged marriage, and it doesn't trigger the mandatory minimum ketubah payment in the case of death of the husband or divorce. Okay. Continuing that discussion, if it is derived that a betrothed woman receives payment of a marriage contract, well, this is not proof. In other words, if there was a written marriage contract, and we say that, okay, then the guy has to pay or his heirs pay if he died, that doesn't prove that in the absence of a marriage contract, she can go seek that payment from the husband in case of divorce or his heirs in case of death. So if it is derived that a betrothed woman receives payment of a marriage contract, this is not proof, as perhaps this too is referring to a case where he wrote a marriage contract for her. And if you would say that if it is referring to a case where he wrote her a marriage contract, well, what is the purpose of stating this? It is obvious that if he wrote a marriage contract, and particularly if they were actually married, that she can collect on that after the marriage ends. So why do we state this? Well, one could answer that while this clause is obvious, it was nevertheless necessary for Rav Chia bar Ami to state that conversely, if she dies, he does not inherit her property. So rather, Abaye retracted his objection to Rabbi Yochanan's proof from the Mishnah, not because of the case of a widow from betrothal, but due to an indication from within the Mishnah itself. Because if it enters your mind that we are dealing with a place where they do not write a marriage contract, and instead a woman's gett, right, her bill of divorce that her husband gave her when he ended the marriage, is effectively her marriage contract, and therefore she can use her gett, her bill of divorce, to collect payment of that mandatory minimum marriage contract, well, that does not make sense. Is it written in a gett that the husband is liable to pay the wife the 100 or 200 dinars that she is owed, right? 100 dinars if it was a second or later marriage, 200 dinars if it was her first marriage. In fact, this is not written in a gett. So maybe there are some localities where they don't actually write out the ketubas, and it's just assumed that everyone gets that mandatory minimum. But it's not that the gett just proves that you're divorced, but the gett doesn't carry within it the terms of the ketubah payment. And even if you'd say that since the sages instituted that she used the gett to collect her marriage contract, it is considered as though the liability of the husband to pay 100 or 200 dinars is written in it. And it would still be problematic to say that the gett is sufficient for her to collect payment, because the husband should still be able to claim that he is exempt and say, I already paid it. I mean, if he already paid it, but he doesn't have evidence of that, he didn't get a receipt for payment, but it's his word against hers, and then he can take a vow. I mean, is this going to mean that these women don't get the payment of their marriage contracts? And if you would say that if the husband would state such a claim, that we would say to him, okay, if in fact you paid her, well, then you should have torn up the gett. right? If the get is used like a ketubah, where when a woman presents her ketubah to get paid after the marriage ends, and the husband pays that obligation, he can then say, okay, I'll give you the money, but you give me the ketubah because I don't want you to bring me before some other court and try to get this payment again. So here's the marriage settlement. Now you give me the ketubah and I'm going to tear it up like we do with promissory notes. But if we are in one of these localities where they don't make written ketubahs, are we going to actually say that the get is using that way? Well, if the get is going to be used as something she can present to get payment of the ketubah payment, then the husband might say, okay, here's your 100 dinars, now give me the get back. But that's a problem for her, right? The get is evidence that she is divorced, meaning she is free to go marry whoever she wants. And since people might know that she had been married, they might say, well, we want to see your get before we allow you to marry this guy. And if she surrendered her get in order to receive the ketubah payment, this would create a big problem for her. And if you would say that if the husband would state such a claim, we would say to him, if in fact you paid her, you should have torn up the get. Well, he could respond and say to us, she did not allow me to tear it up because she said I need the get in order to remarry and use it as proof that I am divorced. And if you would say that we would then say to him, well, you should have torn up the get and written on the back of it, the reason that we tore up this get is not because it is invalid, but rather it is in order that the woman not collect the ketubah payment again with this get. Well, this suggestion is not always applicable. Does everyone who collects payment of a marriage contract collect payment in court where it is possible to write such a legal statement? Therefore, the suggestion that a get serves as a marriage contract remains untenable, and this leads to the conclusion that the basis for collecting payment of a marriage contract where such a document does not exist must be a court enactment, in accordance with the interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan, meaning that in those localities where these documents are not written, she can come and collect. The husband can demand a receipt when he pays, but she's going to be able to collect in the absence of him producing such a receipt. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 1. Mishnah 7. If one found bills of divorce, right? So he found not one get, but plural gets. If one found gets, or bills of manumission of slaves, right? A document that a master of a slave gives the slave to free the slave, or wills, right? Wills, like last will and testament, or deeds of gift or receipts. If one found such documents, he may not return these items to the one who is presumed to have lost them, like the slave, right, or the woman who the husband gave this get to, or the recipient of a gift. All of these are documents of somebody giving something to someone else. And you are not allowed to give these documents to those intended recipients. Why not? You'd think that those people would be really happy to get that document back. Right? We just said before, a woman who receives a get, she wants to have that get so that she can prove that she is divorced. But the problem is, as I say, meaning the Tana of our Mishnah, I say it is possible that these documents were written and then the writer reconsidered about them and decided not to deliver them. Just because you found a get on the street in the marketplace doesn't mean that a man gave that get to a woman and divorced her. He might have been thinking about divorcing her, and a scribe was passing through town who was having a sale on get, so he said, all right, write up a get for me. And he even had witnesses sign it. Now, at the moment that he creates that get, and he signs it, and the witnesses sign it, are he and she divorced? No, of course not. She's only gonna be divorced from him when he hands her the get. Now, he might have written the get and then said, you know what? All right, we had a fight. It's not so bad. I'm not going to give her the get. So now, and then he lost it on his way home. Now, if you pick up that get and you hand it to the wife, then she will be divorced because she received the get that the husband wrote. I mean, there's going to be some problems with that. But still, you see, that's why you don't give it to the recipient, even the one that is mentioned in the document. You would give it to the writer of the document, or you would give it to a rabbinic court. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. It can be inferred from the Mishnah that the only reason that these documents are not returned is that there is a concern that the person obligated by the document reconsidered with regard to them and decided not to deliver them. But if you bring it to the writer of the document and the writer says, yeah, give this found document to the intended recipient. Yes, I did divorce my wife with that. She'll be looking for that, so give it to her. Right, so at that point, okay, there should be no problem. Let's go give it to her, or give it to the recipient of the gift, or give it to the one who is inheriting in the will, right? Or give it to the slave who was received this bill of manumission. But if the writer says, give this found document to the intended recipient, then the finder must give it to him. And since the Mishnah places no limitation on this, presumably this is the law, even if a long time has passed since it was lost. And there is no concern that perhaps the document belongs to someone else with the same name, right? Remember that, this idea of having a last name, that's actually quite modern in history. And what we had much more, so what was Yitzhak's name? Yitzhak was Yitzhak ben Avraham, right? Yitzhak, the son of Avraham. How would you distinguish him from other Yitzhak ben Avrahams? Okay, so he was Yitzhak ben Avraham from Shechem. Maybe they were living near Shechem, from a tent outside Shechem. Right, so you would have the name and the name of the parent, and then the locality, the city, the town, the village, and hopefully that's enough. But could it happen that a guy named Yosef ben Shimon, who was married to a woman named Chaya ben Yaakov, decided to divorce her, and so Yosef ben Shimon, gave a get to Chaya ben Rivka, and then they're divorced. And then the document was lost. So now you're going to go give it to the Chaya, ben Yaakov that But maybe there was another Yosef ben Shimon who was married to a Chaya ben Yaakov, Chaya bat Yaakov. And he divorced her, but, the couple with the same names and the same fathers, they got divorced. But this couple, who have the same names and the same father's names, didn't get divorced. And you might, think, well, obviously, it must be my friends, Yosef ben Shimon, who's married to Chaya bat Yaakov. But it turns out, no, it's a different couple who have the same names. So are we going to be concerned for that or not? And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Mishnah in Tractate Gittin 27a with regard to an agent who was bringing a get, a bill of divorce, to a woman, and he lost it. So if he found it immediately, then the get is still valid. But if not, right, if he lost it and then he only got it back a few days later, then it is not valid, as it is possible that the get that he found is not the same one that he lost. And this second get belongs to someone else whose name and wife's name are identical to the names of the husband and wife in the lost get. Now, remember, we learned that when we did our journey through Tractate Gittin and the laws of the Bill of Divorce, that a bill of divorce is only valid if it was written by a particular man to his wife. And if there were two couples who had everyone had the same names and the same parents' names, etc., and then one wrote up the get for his wife and then changed his mind, he wasn't going to divorce her, but his buddy who has the same name and whose wife has the same name, etc., says, what, I am going to divorce my wife. Can I use your get that you're not using? That get is not valid, right? Because it has to be written for the particular couple. Nevertheless, even though it's not valid, it might get used, and the people might think that they're divorced, and then they remarry, and then since the first divorce was in fact not a valid divorce, and the people remarried by mistake, huge problems because the subsequent marriage was not a marriage, and if they have kids, those kids are going to be mamzers, huge problems, right? So that's why we're going to be very careful with laws and regulations pertaining to bills of divorce. So Rabbah says, So now we have a contradiction, right? If an agent lost a get that he was in the process of delivering to the wife, if he found it immediately, he can deliver it. But if he lost it for some amount of time, let's say a few days, and then he finds it, he cannot deliver it because we're afraid that it might belong to another couple. But we just said in our Mishna that if the writer says, yeah, that is my get, then you can deliver it even if it was lost for a few days. And that's the contradiction. So Rabbah says, this is not difficult, la kashya, because there in Tractate Gittin, the Mishnah is stated with regard to a place where caravans passing through are common. And there is a concern that the found get belongs to someone else with the identical name. By contrast, our Mishnah here is stated with regard to a place where caravans passing through are uncommon. So there is no such concern. There's not so many people with different names in this locality that we would make such a mistake, so I don't have to worry about it. And the Gemara adds, and even in a place where caravans passing through are common, there is not always a concern that the get may belong to another man with an identical name. And this concern is only where it has been established that there are two men named, for example, Yosef ben Shimon in that one city. As if you do not say so, that this concern is taken into account only in a place where it is known that there are two people with the same name, then there is a difficulty presented in the form of a contradiction between this statement of Rabbah and another statement of Rabbah. As there was a certain get that was found in the court of Rav Huna, in which it was written that the get was written in Shaviri city, which is located on the Rakhis River. And Rav Huna said about this, now on 18b, we are concerned about the possibility that there are two cities named Shaviri, and that this get may belong to someone else who lives in the other Shaviri, and therefore it should not be returned. And Rav Chisda said to Rabbah about this issue, go out and examine this law, as in the evening Rav Huna will ask you about it. So Rabbah went out, examined it, and discovered a relevant source. As we learned in the Mishna on page 20a, one must return any court enactment, i.e. a promissory note that has been authenticated by the court, to its owner. Since the get was found in the court, it is in this category and it must be returned, right? A get that was found in a court, right? So it was delivered by the court. It was authenticated in court. So now it takes on the status of a court enactment. So and in Talmudic times, it would happen that sometimes a guy would just hire a scribe to write a get and give it to his wife and be divorced. Later in Jewish history, they stopped allowing that, and they said that any man that wants to divorce his wife, he has to come before a beis din and make sure that the get is written properly and authenticated by the court, etc. And the court will administrate the whole divorce process just to make sure that none of the kinds of mistakes we mentioned before, become part of this process. So the Gemara concludes it's proof that even in a place where passing caravans are common, the concern that the get belongs to another couple applies only if it is known that there is another couple in the same locale with the same names as those written in the get. And the court of Rav Huna is comparable to a place where passing caravans are common, as many people from different places pass through for judgment. Right? A courthouse is actually a place where many people come to have their gets written or delivered. So that's precisely the kind of place where you should be worried that there might be people with the same names. And yet, Rabbah resolved that if one finds a get there, he should return it. So evidently he holds that if it is established that there are two people named Yosef ben Shimon in the city, then there is indeed a concern and the document should not be returned. But unless we know for a fact that there are two guys with the same name, then we're not concerned, and you do return it to the writer of it, not necessarily to the woman, because we're still concerned that he may never have given it to her. Now, the Gemara relates that Rabbah performed an action, i.e. he issued a practical ruling, with regard to a certain get that was found in a flax house in the city of Pumbedisa, in accordance with his halacha, his law, his ruling, as he instructed that the get should be returned. And there is disagreement as to the exact details of that case. There are those who say that this occurred in the place where people sell flax, and it is specifically because it was not established that two couples with the same names lived in the city where the gett was written, that Rabbah ruled that the gett should be returned, despite the fact that passing caravans are common there, because it's a courthouse. And there are those who say that it occurred in the place where the people soak flax, and he ruled that the gett should be returned, even though it was established that there were two couples with the same names living in the city where the gett was written, because passing caravans are not common there. Similarly, Rabbi Zera raised a contradiction between the Mishnah and a Baraisa, and he resolves the contradiction employing the same distinction. So here's the contradiction. We learned in the Mishnah with regard to an agent who was bringing a gett to a woman and he lost it. If he found it immediately, the gett is valid and he can deliver it. But if not, it becomes invalid and he may not deliver it. And Rabbi Zera raises a contradiction between that Mishnah and a Baraisa, which states, if one found a woman's gett in the marketplace, in a case where the husband admits that he wrote it and gave it to the wife, the finder must return it to the wife. But if the husband does not admit to this, then he may return it to neither the husband nor the wife. So in any event, the Baraisa teaches that in a case when the husband admits that he wrote it, the finder must return it to the wife. And this is the law, even if it was found after a long time. And Rabbi Zera answers the contradiction by saying that here, in the case of the Mishnah, the gett where the agent lost it, and the gett is valid only if it is found immediately, as it is a case where it is found in a place where passing caravans are common, and that's why we have to be very careful. And there, in the Baraisa, the gett can be returned even if it was found after a long time, as it is a case where it is found in a place where passing caravans are uncommon. And the Gemara compares the rulings of Rabbah and Rabbi Zera. So there are those who say, with regard to Rabbi Zera's statement, that the finder should not return the gett in a place where passing caravans are common. They say about this, and this applies specifically in a case where it is established that there are two couples in the town who have the same names. So that's why we're going to be very careful. So in that case, Rabbi Zera holds that the gett should not be returned, and this is the same ruling as that of Rabbah. And there are others who say, in a place where passing caravans are common, even if it is not established that there are two couples with the same names, the gett should not be returned, and Rabbi Zera disagrees with the ruling of Rabbah. So the Gemara asks, granted, Rabbah does not state his explanation in accordance with that of Rabbi Zera and raise a contradiction from the Baraisa, as he holds that a Mishnah serves as a stronger basis for raising a difficulty than a Baraisa, as the Mishnah redacted by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi employs more precise language than Baraisas, which are contemporaneous rulings from the time of the Mishnah, but weren't considered authoritative enough to be included in the Mishnah, capital M. But what is the reason that Rabbi Zera does not state his explanation in accordance with that of Rabbah and raise a contradiction from the Mishnah? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Zera could have said to you, does the Mishnah actually teach that if the one who wrote the document says, give it to the intended recipient, that the finder must give it to him? And that this is the law even if a long time passed since it was lost? This was only an inference from the Mishnah. Perhaps the Mishnah merely means to indicate that if the writer says, give it to the intended recipient, the finder must give it to him. But actually, this is to be understood as we maintain in the Mishnah and Tractate Gittin that this law applies only if the document was found immediately. Therefore, Rabbi Zera posed his question from the Baraisa. So the Gemara asks, according to the one who says that according to the opinion of Rabbi Zera, a document may not be returned in a place where passing caravans are common, and this is the law even if it was not established that there are two people named Yosef ben Shimon in the town, and he disagrees with Rabbah, so then with regard to what do Rabbi Zera and Rabbah disagree? What is the foundation of their dispute? And the Gemara answers, Rabbah maintains his opinion based on the Mishnah on page 20a, that teaches one must return any court enactment. And he understands that we are dealing with a document that was found in court, and a court is equivalent to a place where passing caravans are common. And therefore, he maintains that it is specifically in a place where it is established that there are two people with the same name that the finder should not return the document to its presumed owner. But in a place where we have not established that there are two people with the same name, then you can return it to its owner. And Rabbi Zera, who disagrees with Rabbah, could have said to you, does the Mishnah teach that one must return any court enactment that was found in the court? It teaches that one must return any court enactment, period, without specifying the location where the court enactment was found. And it is actually referring to a case where the documents were found outside the court. So if it was found inside the court, it should not be returned. Therefore, Rabbi Zera was not convinced by Rabbah's proof. And Rabbi Yirmiyah states an alternative resolution to the contradiction between the Mishnah here and the Baraisa on the one hand, and the Mishnah in Gittin on the other. A found gett should be returned only in a case where the witnesses who signed the gett say, we have never signed a gett of a person named Yosef ben Shimon other than this one, this Yosef ben Shimon, in which case there is no concern that the gett belongs to someone else and the finder can feel free to return this one and go to Yosef. And if he says, yeah, that's my gett, I gave it to my wife, so now the finder can freely, safely, with full confidence and good heart, give it to the woman who lost that gett after she received it, and she'll be anxious to get it back. And the Gemara asks, if that is so, what is the purpose of stating that one returns the gett? Since it clearly belongs to him, there is no question that it must be returned to him. He said he wrote it. And the Gemara answers that it is necessary lest you say that one should be concerned that perhaps it happened that another gett was written in the names of the husband and the wife identical to the names of this husband and wife of the second gett, and the names of the witnesses on the gett are identical to the names of the witnesses. So there was a Yosef ben Shimon who divorced Chaya ben Bat Yaakov, and it was witnessed by, Salvador Litvak and Bill Eldridge, and we both signed the gett. But it turns out that there was another Yosef ben Shimon who divorced his wife, Chaya Bat Yaakov, and they did it in another town, and there was another Salvador Litvak and another Bill Eldridge who happened to be the witnesses on that gett. And just in case that there were two documents with all the parties had identical names, and we don't want to end up creating a divorce where there was no divorce, that we had to be concerned. Do we really have to be concerned about that? And Rabbi Yirmiyah states, the alternative resolution to the contradiction between the Mishnah here and the Barais on the other hand, and the Mishnah and Gittin on the other, is that a found gett should be returned only in a case where the witnesses who signed the divorce say, we already said that. And the Gemara asks, if that is so, what is the purpose of stating that one returns the gett? And the Gemara answers that it is necessary, lest you say, we're not going to be concerned about this, right? Lest you say that one should be concerned that perhaps it happened that another gett was written in which the names of the husband and the wife are identical to the names of the husband and the wife, and the witnesses on the gett are identical to the witnesses in the other gett, when in fact they are different people. So to counter this, the Mishnah teaches us that we are not concerned about that extremely remote possibility. I'm actually close to done. If you have questions or comments, please get them in now. So Rav Ashi stated another resolution to the contradiction between the Mishnah and the Baraisa. The gett should be returned only in a case where the person claiming to have lost it provides a clear-cut distinguishing mark. For example, he says, there is a hole in the gett next to such and such a letter. The Gemara comments, and Rav Ashi permits one to return such a gett specifically when the one claiming to have lost it says that the hole is next to such and such a letter, as that is a clear-cut distinguishing mark. But if he said only that it had a hole without mentioning its precise location, one should not return the gett, as that is not considered a clear-cut distinguishing mark. So the Gemara explains, Rav Ashi is uncertain whether a lost item is returned to its owner on the basis of distinguishing marks, whether this is by Torah law or whether it is by rabbinic law. Right? When we get more into the finding and the laws of lost and found objects, if you say I lost a bag of money. And, you say the amount of money. Now, maybe, you heard that somebody dropped a bag of money and now you're trying to claim it. So a distinguishing mark will go a long way where you say, well, along with the money was contained in a bag that I actually used to buy lentils a few weeks ago. And so you'll find on the inside of the bag that I turned inside out, the signature of the lentil seller. That would be a distinguishing mark, right? But are these distinguishing marks used to claim lost objects? Depending on what kind of mark and how specific. Is it by Torah law? Is it by rabbinic law? We'll get into that later in our journey. But for here, Rav Ashi was uncertain whether this kind of distinguishing mark would be considered by Torah law or by the rabbinic law. Therefore, in the case of a gett, he holds that one may rely only on a clear-cut distinguishing mark, as everyone agrees that a lost item returned to its owner on the basis of a clear-cut distinguishing mark is by Torah law. And the Gemara relates that Rabba Bar Chana lost a gett, which had been given to him to deliver in the study hall. I'm not sure if he lost it in the study hall or if it was given to him in the study hall, but anyway, he lost it. When it was found, he said, if they request a distinguishing mark, I have one for it. If it depends on visual recognition, I have methods of recognition for it. So they returned the gett to him. He said afterward, I do not know if they returned it to me due to the distinguishing mark that I supplied, and they hold that distinguishing marks are used to return lost items by Torah law, or if they returned it to me due to my visual recognition, and it was specifically because I am a Torah scholar, as Torah scholars are relied upon when they say they recognize an item, but an ordinary person would not be relied upon to recognize the item and have it returned to him. So he had two proofs, and he wasn't sure which one was the basis of them returning the gett to him. And that's where we're going to leave off the conversation for today. Okay, some questions. DL Garin, that's a new name. Welcome, DL. If a broken betrothal requires a gett, is the girl no longer mutter to a Cohen, right? So a divorced woman is not permitted for a Cohen to marry. So if she was never married, but she was betrothed, and then they broke off the betrothal with a gett, is that going to be enough to render her prohibited to marry another Cohen, another priest? I am not sure, but my instinct is telling me strongly that when we covered this in Tractate Gittin, that yeah, she would become prohibited to a Cohen, even though she would still be a virgin. The fact is, a woman who received a gett, I don't think can marry a priest, right? It cannot marry a priest. But I could be wrong about that. So, Google the question or, ask a Paskening Rav. Kathy Klein, another new name, welcome. Did the scribe specifically sign the document? If so, unless they were nomadic, why would they not ask the scribe which of two men with the same name had hired him to author it? Surely they could identify correctly the party in question. I think what you're saying is, let's bring in more evidence, right? So if we could get a hold of the scribe or if we could get a hold of the witnesses, that would resolve everything. And you're absolutely right. But that's not always possible, right? So the question is, maybe the scribe is not available. Maybe the people who signed it are not available. And all we have is the document with the names on it. Is that going to be enough for us to proceed or not? Stephen, why can't the finder just bring it to the court and let them sort it out? And I think the answer there is, first of all, that's always going to be a good course of action. But it's not necessarily what a person did. So maybe somebody wasn't familiar with the law, found it, saw the names, and just handed it, either to the woman or the man named therein. And then later, when we have a question of what was a divorce created or not, then the court would look to these halachas, to these laws, and say, wait a minute, this thing was lost and then delivered. At that point, it was rendered invalid. So if they thought they created a divorce, they didn't, right? And then that's why we would use these laws. So it's not always because the finder, we're going to assume that he's aware of these laws. It's probably more often the case that the finder is not aware of these laws. So much of what we encounter in the Talmud, even though, I'm not a rabbi, I think many people in our audience here are not rabbis. Many people, are not rabbis, don't serve on rabbinic courts, even if they are rabbis. And we want to learn the law, and it's a beautiful thing that we're learning, these laws lishma, for the sake of heaven, and it's a big mitzvah to do that. But very often the sages are talking to other sages, right? And so sometimes these rulings, it's so high level, so sophisticated, such nuance that they're discussing, but they're having a conversation between, the judges and rabbis who are actually going to have to make rulings. They're not writing kind of like a layman's, cliff notes on Jewish law by any means, right? And so that's why so often it's so difficult for us to sort through and understanding what it exactly is that they're saying. And hopefully that is helpful. But I think, from our point of view, one thing is to learn the law as best we can. Another situation is where we actually find the lost object or find ourselves in a complicated halakhic situation, or even a seemingly simple halakhic situation. It's always appropriate to go ask a Rav, right? To go ask our local Orthodox rabbi who we have a relationship with, or one that we just find, and say, what's the law here? I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. Now, Bell, the Romans used descriptive nicknames to designate between people with similar names. For example, Africanus, Caligula, Posthumus. In my own family, Yiddish descriptive adjectives were used to differentiate. I had a relative who was very small and was called Molly Fagala, little bird, to distinguish from another Molly. Sure, and if you happen to grow up in the Lubavitch community, like the year after the Lubavitcher Rebbe died, and even to this day, but especially that year, every boy was named Menachem Mendel. And there's been many other Menachem Mendels, before that and since. But imagine a whole class where every boy is named Menachem Mendel. So there's going to be Meni and Mendi and Mena and Menchemi and Chami. They're going to make up all kinds of nicknames to distinguish the kids, and for just this reason. And finally, Bill, you should definitely be concerned about any document signed by that other Bill Eldridge. He's totally untrustworthy. Very good. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great